Hey, what's up, guys? Back to make another video. This one I'm going to be talking about the AFC West and previewing that division. So we'll get into that. A couple things to go over first. There's a lot of stuff to cover today. First of all, if you didn't see the last video, I kind of went off track a little bit and did a mock draft to just kind of show the process of what I'm thinking when I go through the draft and the way I'm kind of looking at the board this year. So I did a 10-team mock league. You can go back and watch the video. Uh, so I had a pretty good question that came up from somebody in the audience. I just wanted to bring it up because I think it kind of illustrates some strategy that I want to discuss in terms of how I approach the draft. So I'll go into that real quick and then talk about the AFC East. So the question was, so basically in the draft, if you didn't already see it, you can go back and watch it on my page or something like that. So the first round, I took DeAndre Hopkins, and then I took Juju Smith-Schuster in the second round, and then I took Adam Thielen in the third round. So I went three receivers in the first three rounds, which is kind of unconventional. So the question was, noticed you went wide receivers before running backs. Is it because the running backs left after the seventh pick wasn't a strong first-round pick? And do I think running backs are slim pickings this year? So yes and no. I think that I do think that in general, I think that it is right that after I think you get past the first five running backs, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon, Alvin Kamara, Zeke, and Melvin Gordon, the running back tiers drop off. Those guys are in a class of their own, and then after that, it's not as much. But the part of the reason that I did pick Hopkins was because I really like Hopkins for next year. And I think the thing that you especially have to keep in mind is that my advice is a little more geared towards PPR format. So I'd have to go back and check the stats for standards leagues in particular. But basically, there's kind of a advice that goes around in fantasy football that you want to take a running back first and stock up on running backs. And yes, for standard leagues, that might be the right choice, but for PPR leagues, you do not want to do that unless your running back is one of the elite five that I talked about. And the reason being is that wide receivers are, the elite ones are very consistent, and a lot of times what happens is that people are trying to reach for running backs that do not need to be taken that high, and they don't get the value out of that because there's only a certain select amount of running backs that actually put up a lot of numbers. So for me personally, like I would rather have a elite receiver that's going to be consistent for me the whole year, because running backs, they get hurt a lot more easily and their value kind of changes throughout the season. So you can fill the stopgap holes in the running back position as the season goes along. So some stats that kind of discuss that. So this is kind of looking at the point differential between the number 1 and the number 10 running back and receiver, and then I did the same thing with the number 1 and the number 20 running back and receiver to kind of show how the amount of elite people that you have that position is. So for the running back position, the top scorer in PPR format last year was a tie between McCaffrey and Saquon. They both had 374 points. The 10th best running back was Joe Mixon, who had 233 points. So that's a 141 point difference. So there's a pretty big drop off between the number 1 running back from last year and the number 10 running back from last year. So let's do that with the receivers now. The number 1 receiver last year was DeAndre Hopkins. He had 330 points. So yes, he didn't have as many points as McCaffrey and Saquon. But the 10th best receiver was Stephon Diggs, who had 255 points. So that is only an 85-point difference between the first and the 10th best wide receiver. So now let's go to the first and the 20th wide receiver. So the 20th wide receiver's best, his total season numbers was 200 points. So that is a difference of 130 points between Hopkins, the number 1, and the number 20 ranked wide receiver last year. Notice that difference is still less than the difference between the number 1 and the number 10 running back. So my basic point is that receivers are very valuable for you, and you want to make sure that you have the good elite receivers that are going to be top targets for their team, because they can ultimately give you very similar points to the number 1 receiver that year, even if they're around like number 10 or number 8. But for running backs, there's a pretty big difference between number 1 and number 10. So you don't want to reach around and get running backs really high because you could be costing yourself a receiver who's going to give you very close to number 1 receiver volume in their points, if that makes sense. So basically what I'm trying to say is that like don't forget about receivers, because the running back positions change so much, and especially when you have so much consistency at the receiver position, like you can really shore up a position on your team and then fill in the running back holes as it changes over time with handcuffs, keeping an eye out on the waivers, etc. So running backs are not necessarily in slim pickings per se, but I think for the elite ones they are. But for the overall running back field, there are a lot of very talented running backs that you can plug in. The same really cannot be said for some of these receivers because really once you start getting past the 30th receiver, then things really start to drop off. So you want to make sure that you get some of those top 20 or so receivers in the draft in the first few rounds, because those will really kind of help shore up some points. So that's basically my answer to that question, just kind of why I went with receivers there. So now I'll get into the AFC East now. So the first team I'm going to talk about is the Denver Broncos. So Broncos kind of had a pretty rough past few years. They've not done very well since Peyton Manning left. So they have got a new coaching regime now. They fired Vance Joseph finally. And they're rolling with Joe Flacco at quarterback now. So first of all, their opening schedule, they got the Raiders. They're at the Raiders. They're versus the Bears. They're at the Packers. Versus Jacksonville, at Chargers, versus Denver, and then versus Kansas City. So there's a lot of up and down there. They place a good defense and then bad defense, and kind of back and forth. And then their closing schedule, they got the Chiefs and the Lions as their last two. So maybe some good potential there at the end. But quarterback. So I don't know what this team is doing at quarterback. They made a trade for Joe Flacco, and then and committed so much money to him to make you think that they're relying on him as the starter. But then they draft Drew Lock in kind of what was a bit of a reach for him, to be honest. So, but I don't even know if Drew Lock is going to play. So, like, why would you not like shore up a line that is really an offensive line that has really not been very good for you recently, like, or a receiver? I really don't understand what this team is doing. So I really do not like Joe Flacco as somebody that you draft, but I think that he is probably going to do a little better than advertised, because he didn't play very much last year, but when he did, he averaged 17.3 points, which is respectable. So, and especially with the opening game against the Raiders, like, he's not a bad guy to throw out as an initial stream option for you. Maybe to see what you can get. But in general, like, I don't like him as a draft pick, because I don't know how long he's going to hold on to this position before they give it to Locke. So, but not a bad option. So the running back position. So running back is interesting. Philip Lindsay is their primary running back. He really surprised a lot of people last year, number 13th ranked running back, Pro Bowler. But there's a lot of questions about whether or not this is really his backfield long term, or if it's going to be Royce Freeman, who is the guy who's kind of got a little more hype around him last year for taking over the backfield. So I really like Philip Lindsay, especially in PPR. I think he's a good receiving back. He gives them a lot of versatility. But so I do like Philip Lindsay, and I think that he's going to be somebody that's going to be there like kind of in the middle, and that'll be a good value for him. But I do like Royce Freeman too, because I think that Royce Freeman is got the talent. I think he was like a second or third round draft pick. I have to double check. But I mean, he didn't really show much potential last year, but he's a guy that people know is very talented. And maybe he just needed a year to kind of get used to the offense. So Royce Freeman is somebody that I would consider too, but don't expect him to be somebody that you could throw in right away. This is somebody you got to stash and see what happens to him. And then they also got Devontae Booker, which like that guy's just a waste of space. Like, don't even consider him at all. So wide receiver. So I originally was not going to include Emmanuel Sanders because he tore his Achilles last December, and I thought he was basically done. But I actually saw an article today that said that he expects to go by week 1, which I don't know how that would happen. That'd be kind of miraculous, to be honest. But I mean, kudos for him for trying to get out there. This receiving core is so bad throughout that like if he's gonna play, like he's gonna get a lot of volume. The only thing is that like I don't know how much I trust his health trying to rush back from that injury. So I don't know like where he's gonna go on the board once this news kind of gets more disseminated throughout the mock draft board or whatever. But like this is still a very good opportunity for him if he stays healthy. Because the other receivers on their team, they've got Cortland Sutton. He didn't do anything with his opportunity last year. Deshaun Hamilton was solid down the stretch. He's kind of Emmanuel Sanders' position, though, so it's hard to tell what his production is going to be if Sanders is there. And then Tim Patrick, who just was useless. And then for some reason they didn't get a receiver until the 7th round. His name is Juwan Winfrey. He might be a sleeper because he's from Colorado. Maybe he's used to the altitude there and can kind of step in, because that was kind of Philip Lindsay's situation last year. But I really do not like a lot of these receivers in general because I just don't know who's going to step up. This is a void that I think that one of these guys can fill, but I think for now you just have to wait and see what their status is. So if these guys happen to fall in the draft, like stash them maybe, but like the offense just I really don't like it for next year. Tight ends are interesting though. They've got 2 young tight ends. They drafted Noah Fant out of Iowa, and then they have Jake Butt coming back from previous years, but he's battled injuries and not really been able to be on the field. So they're both young, talented tight ends. I think they have potential, and they're guys to watch out for as potential sleepers to put in at the position. But I don't think you would draft them for now. I think you just kind of maybe Fant, but if you're in a deep league. But these are guys to keep an eye on because this is a natural void that could be filled. Defense. So Denver defense is very well known and respected. They were the number 7 defense last year, but they are not very consistent, and their production has generally not been as good since the Super Bowl run. I really don't like them. They lost some secondary pieces, and they're generally getting older. And to be honest, I honestly think this is going to be one of the worst teams in the league next year. So I would not be surprised if they did something stupid and traded Von Miller, because the front office there has just been bad the last few years. So maybe like a rebuilding, thinking they'd trade Von Miller to a contender or something. So there's so many question marks with this defense. Like, but if they fall to you at the end of the draft, I don't think that's a bad take. Their kicker, Brandon McManus, is okay. But, I mean, that's somebody maybe to consider in the 7th round, but I wouldn't really put too much concern into him. But, yeah, so that's Denver. So, next team is Kansas City. So, the Kansas City Chiefs, a lot of firepower on this team, and a lot of potentially new faces. So, let's figure out who's going to be valuable this year. So, they've got a tough first matchup. They played the Jacksonville Jaguars, and then they got a nice matchup against the Oakland Raiders. Kind of a tough matchup against Baltimore. They go to Detroit versus Indianapolis versus Houston versus Denver. And then at the end of the season, they've got New England, Denver, and Chicago in the fantasy playoffs. So a little bit of up and down both ways. But the offense is so good, I feel like it's going to make up for some of those bad matchups. So let's start with Patrick Mahomes, the quarterback. So a lot of questions about like where Patrick Mahomes should be taken this year, because last year, so just for numbers purposes again, Patrick Mahomes was not only the number 1 quarterback, but he's the number 1 player in fantasy football. He had 507 points. The next best player in all of fantasy football was Matt Ryan, who had 418 points. So Mahomes nearly has over 100 points greater than the next best player. And then the guy after that was Big Ben, who was at 401 points. So this guy is obviously was a huge asset. So people are going to be justifying for him to go in the first round. But there's a lot of things that have changed on this team. Kareem Hunt is not there anymore. Tyreek Hill, there's a lot of questions about whether or not he's going to play and when. I mean, I do think he's going to still be the number 1 quarterback for next year. I would bet that. But I mean, but I would not expect these ridiculous numbers that they had last year, because just simply like some of the weapons aren't there, and I think people are kind of starting to figure him out. He kind of started throwing some interceptions down the stretch when they went in the playoffs and stuff. So I don't see his numbers being as high, but I do see him being somebody that is worth a reach into maybe at most the third round. But I mean, I almost consider taking him in the fourth round of my draft. But he is good. But you just have to understand that like he might not repeat those numbers, and don't reach for him like Aaron Rodgers. Should not be a first round pick. Don't let anybody tell you that. So running backs. So Damian Williams is currently slotted as their number one back. They also brought in Carlos Hyde from Jacksonville, and they have Darwin Thompson, who's a guy, and Darrell Williams is still there, and then Darwin Thompson's the rookie they drafted in the 6th round. So I really do not know what to make of this backfield. Like Damian Williams has got the number one slot right now, but I mean this guy is 27. He's an undrafted player. I mean, he really only benefited down the stretch because they had so many injuries to their other players. He was kind of the one left. So, and he did well for himself, but I don't know if I like him at longevity. So, I mean, that's why I kind of freaked out when somebody in the last video when somebody took him in like the 3rd round, because that's just not smart, man. Like, I don't know. And Carlos Hyde, I think he has potential to step in, but I don't know like where and when. I mean, the one that I'm interested in is Darwin Thompson, because this is a guy that I think is he's a late round sleeper. He was pretty productive in college. Maybe he might be able to be the one that jumps in and fills the backfield. But I mean, these guys are all right, but I mean, I would not reach for their value. Let them slip a little bit to you, because I could see this becoming a running back committee as the season goes on. But yeah, so wide receivers. So a lot is you have to start with Tyreek Hill. I mean, this guy was the number 3 receiver last year when he was healthy. With his production, he was number 1 in standard leagues. But how long is he going to be suspended for? Will he play this year? There's a lot of questions with that, and that really affects where you take him in the draft. He's got to be rostered in any case, though, because of his trade value. There's going to be news that comes out of whether or not he plays or not plays, and you got to take advantage of those opportunities. I mean, this guy, let's say that he does get back on the field and doesn't get any suspension time or something like that. I still do not like him as a top. I probably would rank him around number 5 or 6, because he is inconsistent. He does have games where he'll blow up, but then I'll have other games where he'll have probably 5 points. So you have to understand that you're not always going to get the most consistent production from him, but an elite player nonetheless. And you got to make sure that even if he's suspended for a lengthy period of time, that you draft him. I don't like Sammy Watkins. I think that he's got opportunity, but I mean, he's just so inconsistent. He's just never really been able to get out of that since he left the Bills. The other guys that got come back, Demarcus Robinson and Marcus Kemp, those guys are interesting because I could see them potentially stepping in and filling the void. But the one that I mostly like, that I think that you have to make sure that you is taken if he's still out there, is Mecole Hardman. Mecole Hardman. So this guy. So let's compare him and Tyreek Hill. So Tyreek Hill was drafted in the 5th round, end of the 5th round. He played at West Alabama, and his 40-yard dash was 4.29, and obviously he's improved it from since then, but blazing fast. And then Mecole Hardman, went to the University of Georgia, 2nd round pick, so he's got a little more refined skill than Tyreek Hill did at the time, and he ran a 4.33. So he's arguably in a better position as a prospect than Tyreek Hill was at the time, and very similar skill set. I mean, if Tyreek Hill is not playing in the beginning of the season, then Mecole Hardman is my candidate sleeper to fill this position and to fill that void. And this guy could come out of nowhere and be like a top 10 receiver the first few weeks. So much value there, and there's so much potential for him. I mean, you got to make sure that this guy is spotted early, because smart people are going to pull him off the board. So yeah, that's my take. That's somebody that I think is going to potentially fill that. And then Travis Kelce. So Travis Kelce, number one tight end the last few years. I mean, this guy's arguably got first round value just simply because you look at the tight end points. Kind of getting back to what I was talking about with running back receivers. So Kelsey had 287 points last year. That was the best among tight ends. The next was 274. That was Zach Ertz. 254 George Kittle. So top three guys, and they're going to be the top three for next year. And then after that, you got 218, so significant drop-off to Eric Ebron. But his production is going to go down too, I think, just based on what I talked about a couple videos ago. Jared Cook was 190, so and then after that, 155. So from 1 to 6, you dropped almost 130 points. So you got to make sure that Travis Kelce is arguably a first-round pick because of that. And I think that if you're at the end of the first round, that is somebody that you might want to consider snagging because you really shore up a tight end, even though it is an unconventional take to go tight end first round. So defense. So the Chiefs' defense, they got a bad reputation. They were actually number 5 last year though, which was very surprising to me. But they did have some games where they got a lot of touchdowns, which skewed that. They're not always the most consistent, but I do expect with their new defensive coordinator, they might be a bounce-back team. And they got some good players like Tyrann Mathieu and Frank Clark that can kind of fill the positions. So I do kind of think their defense could surprise people. Harrison Butker is their kicker, and I like him. He's got a lot of opportunity, very accurate. Somebody that I would consider maybe taking in the second to last round. Could be a very solid value for you. So that's all I got on the Chiefs. The next team I'm going to talk about is the Los Angeles Chargers. So Los Angeles is another interesting team with a lot of fantasy firepower. So, and potentially could win this division. I actually think the Chargers are probably going to win the division. It's going to be very close with them in Kansas City, but I do like the Chargers slightly more. They start off against the Colts, then they go to the Lions versus the Texans at Miami. So very good first couple games. Versus Denver, versus Pittsburgh, at Tennessee. Down the stretch, they host Jacksonville, Minnesota, Oakland at the end of the season, and then Kansas City. So on the road. So they got a very nice opening schedule and a very nice fantasy playoff schedule. So good people to watch out for here. Their quarterback is Phillip Rivers. So Phillip Rivers. Very consistent quarterback, one of the best of all time, kind of under the radar, but I really don't particularly like him for fantasy football. So last year he was the 10th best quarterback, which is not bad, but I mean, you're a 10-team league, potentially at 12, and I mean, that's really not an elite player necessarily, and there's a lot of guys below him that I think are on the rise from that ranking last year. And the big reason is because last year he only rushed for 7 yards. Like that's impressive, to be honest. Like how he played every single game and only rushed for 7 yards. Like that's wild. But anyway, I mean, this guy, he's gonna have some games. He's not gonna give you anything from the rushing perspective. And he's very turnover prone at times, so you really are not always getting the most consistency out of him, especially with Melvin Gordon as their running back. A lot of times they'll just hand it off to him when they're in the red zone. So I really don't like Phillip Rivers that much. So running backs, Melvin Gordon is this guy is so underrated. It's crazy, especially for somebody that's in the city of LA. So this guy. He was number 7 running back last year, but if he was also hurt for several games. So if he was healthy, he would have been the 4th best running back last year, which is better than Kamara and Zeke Elliott. So, I mean, this guy is another one that I think that he's probably going to fall a little bit in the draft because people forget about him, and if he's there, then you take him because. I do slightly like Gordon better than DeAndre Hopkins because Gordon is just such a value throughout the field. He can catch, he can run. I mean, he's gonna fall. I mean, people don't think of him as like a top running back, but this is somebody that's definitely got potentially the number 1 running back next year. Just excellent player to have on your team. Another one and then their running backs are also interesting. So they have Austin Eckler, who's a good PPR flex player. He was the 25th running back last year, even though he was mostly a backup to Gordon throughout the year. And that's because he catches so many passes and is so explosive. So a guy that you could throw out there and even when Gordon is starting and give you good value. I like Austin Eckler as somebody you could take later in the draft as a good PPR option. And maybe even as with increased handcuff value. But the real handcuff that I think you want because he's got a similar skill set to Melvin Gordon as a workhorse back is Justin Jackson. And Justin Jackson proved that when Gordon was out, he could be very productive as well. So if you have Melvin Gordon, I think it's a little bit bigger of a priority to have Justin Jackson than Austin Eckler. Eckler's good, but I mean, if you really want to replace Gordon's value, you got to get Justin Jackson. All right, wide receivers. So Keenan Allen is their top receiver. They also got Mike Williams, and then they've got Travis Benjamin coming back, and then they got a bunch of new guys. So Keenan Allen was number 12 receiver last year. I don't really like him too much. I mean, he's good, but he's also tends to be very inconsistent, especially down the stretch last year. So not super high on him, but he's not bad to have on your team. He's a good second to third round pick. Mike Williams, I actually really like to potentially fill a void for this team. He's been improving steadily every year. He hasn't really blown up like people expected, but they lost Tyrell Williams. Now Williams is clearly the number 2 wide receiver. His value is somewhat limited by the fact that they have so many other receiving options at the other positions like Gordon and Hunter Henry. But like this, I mean, he's somebody that I think could potentially really be a good value for you if you take him in the middle rounds where he's expected to go. He could be a good candidate for a breakout. There's also I keep an eye on these new guys that they have as well. They have a lot of rookies that are not drafted very high, but kind of filling in those positions. One of them might be able to kind of step in as the 3rd or 4th receiver and kind of give you some points here and there too. Tight end. So Hunter Henry, their tight end. Hunter Henry's got a lot of hype, but he really hasn't actually shown very much. He was injured all last year, except in their playoff game. He came back. But even when he played before that, he was mostly in the shadow of Antonio Gates, which, you're literally competing against, a 45-year-old man, and you still can't, pull down, number 1 tight end numbers. I don't know. So, I mean, some guy in the draft the other day took him in the 6th round. That is way too high for Hunter Henry. I think this guy could be good, but, I mean, he's somebody that you don't want to waste a pick on when you could get a solid running back, honestly, I almost kind of like Austin Eckler more than Hunter Henry because of the potential for I don't know about that, but I mean there's good PPR backs that you can get that are probably better value than Hunter Henry that might be more consistent for you too. So anyway, Chargers defense is solid. They're going to be rated relatively high, but they really weren't great statistically last year. Keep an eye on them, but I wouldn't take them higher than the 2nd to last round or last round. And then their kicker, Mike Badgley, he's worth mentioning because he's not ranked particularly high because he kind of started kicking for them around mid-season, but he was very accurate. He made 15 out of 16 field goals. He's somebody that could, especially with an offense this explosive, can really kind of step into his own and be very productive for you. So, yeah. Good candidate in the last round. And then the last team, the Oakland Raiders. So a lot of changes in Oakland. Obviously, picking up AB, starting to kind of get John Gruden's vision involved. So what's it going to mean for the team? So they start off, they played the Broncos and the Chiefs. Then they go to Minnesota, and then at Indianapolis. Versus Chicago, they got a bye, at Green Bay, at Houston. Then they finished the season, Tennessee, Jacksonville, and the Chargers. So some tough games there at the end. So, quarterback, Derek Carr. Derek Carr was bad last year. I think people expected him to be a little better than he was since they made the playoffs 2 years ago. But, I mean, they really kind of did not show very much. Number 18th quarterback. And people think things are going to bounce around for turn around for him because now they've got Antonio Brown. I don't see it, to be honest. Like, this is so much like they didn't really do very much at all to shore up their line, offensive line, and they've kind of got some question marks there. It's just, I mean, they're a potential team to make a bounce back, but then the reason I don't like them is because they've got the Chiefs and the Chargers in their division, which are clearly better teams. And I don't know. I'm not very high on Derek Carr. I wouldn't draft him, to be honest, but he's somebody to keep an eye on. Running back. So do not draft Doug Martin. Like, this is just another Frank Gore situation right here. The guy is just done. Jalen Richard is okay as a PPR player, but there's so many better PPR players out there. Like, just don't even waste your time with him, to be honest. He's somebody to keep an eye on, maybe if as a late round pick if you're in a deep league. Josh Jacobs has got a real opportunity here. He's the top running back that was taken in this year's draft out of Alabama. So he's got Alabama running backs kind of up and down in the NFL. Sometimes they're very good, sometimes they're a little disappointing. But this is a good situation for him. He's somebody that I think if the line were better, I would like him as a potential breakout candidate. But I just don't know like how it's going to work there. Like if their offensive line is really going to help the guy out much. But he's somebody to keep an eye on as a good sleeper and worth a solid draft pick if you're in need of a good running back. Or a good running back breakout candidate. Wide receivers. So Antonio Brown coming over from the Steelers, that's the big move there. He was the number 4 receiver last year, and that was even though he missed the last game of the season. So I mean, Antonio Brown is good. He had a very good floor, and when he's explosive, he's really on. But I mean, I don't really know what I think about this move to the Raiders. Like, there's a big drop off between Big Ben and Derek Carr, and like, I think that like he's got some character issues. Like, I have a hard time like seeing like how this is gonna mesh. But I do think that he is somebody that if I don't like him as one of my better receivers, but he's somebody that I think that he's gonna still be like top 5 to 8 or something like that. He's somebody worth taking, but not worth reaching for at all by any means. Tyrell Williams has got okay value if you want like a good flyer for explosive value, but this guy is not very consistent, and I kind of see that being the same. I do like, so they got Hunter Renfrow from Clemson in the draft, and I do like him as a potential guy for them as kind of like a slot receiver. He was very good in college. He's got a lot of experience. And I think this is a great opportunity for him. He doesn't really have a whole lot of competition there for targets. And maybe he could kind of step into his own and kind of fill a void as kind of a sneaky player to put in there, especially if these guys get down and you'll be throwing it a lot. Tight end. So they brought over Luke Wilson from the Seahawks.